Welcome to Liberty Hill Pet Resort's level training. This course is designed to let your dog learn at a pace comfortable for him and you. You will have multiple times during the week available to come and learn how to be a team. There are three keys to being a success in terms of working with your dog. The key number one is relationship. This is the most important one. We will also talk about management and training. We obviously have dogs because we love to be around them, and sometimes some of us want to spend more time with the dogs than with people. We are going to spend a lot of time in this class building relationships, which is really what training is ultimately all about. We want them to love us as much as we love them. For that reason, we are not going to really work against them as much as we are going to work with them to try to get them to do. The second key to success is management. Anytime you come up to us and say, hey, I'm having a problem with my dog, we are going to look at management options. We will help you solve the problem, but we also want to prevent the problem from continuing. A lot of times, management is the way we get to that. In fact, you're probably already using some of these things, but not realizing it. When we get a new puppy, we are using baby gates or closing doors. That's management. We're getting things off the counter and having kids pick up their shoes and toys and putting things away. That's management. We obviously walk our dogs using a leash or a harness of some sort and a collar. All of that is management. Things that we're going to suggest are not things that are totally foreign. We all use a certain amount of management already. We're going to talk about helpful management tips, and you might hear some of these from the instructors. Massage in some situations, that will help the dogs relax, which can help manage their emotional state while they're in class. Of course, this is something you can do at home also. We'll occasionally ask you to bring or put a t-shirt or a thunder shirt on your dog. This is especially useful for dogs that are a little bit nervous or they're just kind of coming out of their skin because they're a little worried. Sometimes a t-shirt or thunder shirt can really help. If you put a kid's t-shirt on a dog, you basically put their head through the head hole and then their front paws through the armholes. You then bundle it up on top and put a rubber band or something like that around it. You want it to fit fairly snug. We find that a lot of dogs, especially nervous dogs, like that swaddling feel. Again, this is a management technique that you might see or hear from us in class. Delicious treats. We'll talk a lot about the treats we want you to bring, which definitely helps with your dog. Space requirements is a big management issue, so we're going to sometimes have you move to a different location in the room. However, we also want to give all of the dogs space. The more space your dog has, the generally better they will learn and focus on you, just like with kids. If you're too close to your friend, you're going to be a little more distracted. Same thing with dogs. The third key to success is training. Obviously, that's why you're joining us. You come to class for training, and that's the number one thing people think of when they come to a training class. However, if you have a really good relationship and you're doing some really good management, training's going to be really easy and relatively fun. That's what we want. We want this to be easy and fun. If you don't have a good relationship with your dog, if you're constantly battling each other or if it's a battle of wills, that makes training really hard and it's really not much fun either. Also, if you're not managing, you can do all the training in the world. But if you come here and do an hour of training during class and then the rest of your dog's life they have no management, they have free will to do whatever they want and there's no controls over them. This will make them hard to train as well. This is why we talk about all three of these keys to success: a good relationship, management, and training. So now we're going to quickly go through how dogs and people, actually any animal, learns. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. If your dog does something and it's followed by something the dog likes, they're going to do that behavior again. This is training at its most basic core. If your dog does anything and it's followed by something he likes, he's going to do that behavior again. Unfortunately, it works for good behaviors and it works for bad behaviors. So it's not a matter of the behavior. It's a matter of what happens when the dog does that behavior. For example, if your dog sits and then you pat him on the head and give him a treat, he's likely to sit again because he knows that is a good thing. But by the same token, if he jumps up on the counter and grabs a loaf of bread and he likes bread, guess what? He just got reinforced for jumping on the counter. That's what we call counter surfing. If your dog jumps up on people and they pet him and he likes petting, he's going to jump on them some more. Same thing. If he jumps on people and you shove him, a lot of dogs thinks that's a huge game, especially some of the sporting breeds. If you have a German short-hair pointer who jumps up on you and you shove him off, you might think you're being a disciplinarian to that dog. But that dog probably thinks this is a great game. He's going to jump back on you. We really want you to pay attention to some of these key issues. Take note of what your dog really likes and what you're doing that might accidentally be rewarding the behaviors, and some of those we might not really like. When your dog does something that you don't like, there's a benefit in it for him. So even though you might not like it, the dog is continuing to do that behavior because there is some benefit to the dog. He is getting something out of it. For example, with reactive behavior, dogs that bark at other dogs, it's the reactive behavior that can actually give the dog more space. If he is barking at another dog and that dog backs up, your dog is thinking, hey, barking's a really good thing. It causes dogs to stay away from me and I really need that space. So there's a benefit to it for him. He's not just barking to be annoying. He's barking because he's saying, hey, that gives me more space. Pulling on a leash. If you allow your dog to pull and then he gets to wherever he wants to go, that is being reinforced. This is a great example when you're using a retractable leash. If your dog goes too far on the retractable leash and pulls a little bit, and then you release the tension so he can go an additional 6 feet, you've actually just rewarded him for pulling. That's an actual benefit to him. The same thing happens with barking or pawing. If they're barking at you, then you give them attention, or they're pawing at you and you give them attention, you're actually reinforcing the pawing and the barking. I had a client one time that was having a problem with their dog barking. The client says, my dog will bark and bark and bark until I give him a treat. I don't know how to stop him. She didn't understand that the dog was barking, and in order to get the dog to be quiet, she was getting a treat out and feeding him. So the dog would bark, she would give him a treat. The dog would be quiet for a few minutes until he would start barking again, and the cycle continued. When I pointed it out to her she was actually rewarding the barking, she realized she needed to change a little bit of what she was doing to work with her dog. I point out stuff to you because your dog is just doing what feels good and right to him. Also, he is doing what rewards him. So you really have to look at things with the eye of the dog. They don't necessarily follow our guidance or do what we want them to do just because they love us. Hopefully they do love us. But the dogs aren't doing these things to annoy you, to be mean, or to spite you. They are doing these things because they work for them in some format. All right, so at this point, a lot of people ask me, why do my dogs do certain things? Why do they act a certain way? Here's the thing, we don't totally know. I mean, there's a combined result of everything about your breed versus the environment they live in versus the socialization experience they have had. There's a lot that goes into why dogs act a certain way. So obviously there's some general breed tendencies. If you have a herding breed, it is not very surprising when those dogs do herding behaviors. They might try to keep the family together, or they might go and nip at the heels of your children. This is fairly common in certain breeds because of these breed tendencies. But then, whether or not your dog has a lot of socialization experience and what kind of experiences they had, that's all going to play into it. Basically, dogs are a little bit of a mix of nature versus nurture. so we really can't rule out any of them. We do tailor our instruction to your dog's needs. So as the instructor is working with the class, they're going to go around to each individual dog and owner and tell you guys a little bit of a tweak you might do for whatever exercise we are working on. We want to make sure that we're doing things in a way that suits your dog the best. This is going to be a very, very brief introduction into learning theory. It's really a 5-minute introduction into learning theory. We have two basic types of learning that we're going to be doing in class with your dog. One is classical conditioning and the other is operant conditioning. If you think back to maybe high school science classes or psychology classes, you may have heard some of these things. Classical conditioning is Ivan Pavlov's bell. How many of you heard of Ivan Pavlov? Hopefully a few. It's probably bringing you back to high school. Ivan did an experiment on digestion. It had nothing to do with dogs, but he was using dogs for the experiment. Ivan would get everything all ready to run the experiment, and the dogs needed to eat so he could track their digestive system processes. When the dogs were all ready, he would get them hooked up into a harness. He would ring a bell, and then his assistant would bring the food in. They would feed the dogs and run their experiment. Well, what Ivan figured out was the dogs started to anticipate the food when they heard the bell. Their emotional state became one of, hey, that bell means I'm about to eat. And involuntarily, they would start doing things like drooling, or their eyes would change. Their pupils would change. These are all classical condition. It works on involuntary behaviors, things that happen because some kind of reaction is triggered in the dog, and it's completely involuntary. That's one way of learning. Another way of learning is through operant conditioning, which is dogs that learn to operate their own environment based on things they do. These are voluntary behaviors. The common scientist that we talk about with operant conditioning is B.F. Skinner. He taught rats that if they press a lever, they would get a treat. Some of that stuff is going to be what we work on with your dogs. The thing is, you're going to end up using both of these. We talk about both classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and they're both working at any given time on your dog as your dog learns. So it's important to keep that in mind. Here is a video on classical conditioning. And here is a video on operant conditioning. All right, hopefully these videos help give you a little bit of understanding. We're going to use both classical and operant conditioning during class. The classical conditioning especially comes into play when we first bring the dogs here. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel happy. We need them to be comfortable. The reality is, if your dog gets any place new and they do not feel safe, they also can't learn. It would be the equivalent of trying to teach you some math problems right after you've entered a really stressful environment. If you go someplace where it's really hard for you to focus, you probably need time to decompress and relax before you're actually able to think. The same is true with dogs. The first thing we want them to do when they get to class is just relax. We want them to get comfortable and feel safe. We're not going to ask much of them. We just want them to know that this is a good place. Then we're going to actually start teaching them behaviors and getting them to actually do things. If they sit or lay down, they get rewarded. This is where the operant conditioning comes into play. It's really, really important for us to make sure that your dog is comfortable when they get here. We're going to do a lot the first few sessions of arrival time to hopefully get your dogs to relax, because if they don't like being here, they're not going to have a lot of fun. We want them to have fun. We want you to have fun too. So we want you to be relaxed as well. A distinction I want you to make really quickly is the difference between luring versus rewarding. You'll see that there's going to be times in class that we might help your dog a little bit by luring him with the food, which means we can show the dog the treat and they will generally follow us. You can get the dog to follow the treat in your hand. There are some behaviors that we might teach by using a lure. However, we need to get the food out of your hand as the lure as quickly as possible because otherwise the lure actually becomes part of the signal that your dog needs in order to do the behavior. In other words, if you teach your dog to lay down time and time and time again with food in your hand, that food in your hand actually becomes a signal. And then when you have no food in your hand, the dog thinks, I have no idea what we're doing. Luring is okay, but we want to make sure that we don't lure a lot and we want to get the treat out of the hand as soon as possible. However, that does not mean we're not going to reward the dog. A reward is something you give the dog in terms of a treat after the dog does the behavior, but they don't have to see that treat in order to do it. Ideally, I would like the dog to sit or lay down and then I'll pull the treat out and give it to them. I don't necessarily want them to see the treat at the time. It's really just a subtle distinction that we want you to understand and learn as you start training with your dog. Here is a video of a lure versus a reward with using a little rat. All right, everyone is listening to this video because they've obviously signed up for levels class. And right now, all the dogs are going to start in level 1. Regardless of whether you've had training before or whether you're just brand new, everyone starts in level 1. Our focus is going to be the basic obedience skills as we move through the levels. But remember, our goal initially is that we just want relaxed and happy dogs. Some of you might have dogs that are a bit more nervous. These are what we call cautious canines. These dogs might be in level 1 a little bit longer because the first few times they come, we might just be playing games with them and just letting them get comfortable. If they aren't comfortable, they aren't going to learn, and we don't want to rush them into training. Just remember the goal initially is relaxed, happy dogs. Don't worry if your dog is not doing anything by the end of the first session. That is still fine. Everyone is going to start in level 1, then every level has some skills that you want to accomplish. As you accomplish these skills, you move up to the next level. If your dog has already had training before, you might come to the first level 1 and you've already had those skills. The instructor will say, okay, next session, come to level 2. We will be telling you when to move up, and if you have questions, you can ask us as well. What to bring as treats. You would like to bring lots and lots and lots of treats. Bring more treats than you think you can possibly use. I would say about 500. You want small treats, not larger than the size of a pea. If you look at some of the pictures on the right-hand side, that's 25 treats. So that's not a lot of food that your dog is eating. But we want 25 treats, which is 25 individual times you can reinforce your dog. The same applies to the other picture of a mozzarella stick. Cheese sticks or hot dogs can become well over 100 treats if you cut them up small. We want really pea-sized treats, at least 500. You may go home with some, but that's better to go home with some because you didn't use them all than to run out in the middle of class. We want them ideally to be soft, so not a treat that you have to crunch. If you give them something crunchy like a milk bone, they're going to bite into it and then pieces will fall on the floor and they'll spend the next couple of minutes cleaning up the crumbs. So we want them to have stuff that's not going to spill onto the floor. It just keeps training a little bit faster. Also, the smellier they are, the better they are to your dog. I would suggest anything that's kind of smelly. Liver, pepperoni treats, any of those kind of things. I make a lot of my treats from turkey franks with a hot dog, with the hot dogs or turkey franks, I like to cut them up into really tiny pieces and then I microwave them for 50 to 60 seconds so that they're dry. That way they're not greasy and gross when you're trying to hand them to your dog, but they also hold up a little bit better. You cook them really until they're almost burned. That's harder than how you would cook them if you were going to actually eat them. Make sure you bring these treats to class. Other things that can really help and that we want you to bring is a bag to clean up um, any anytime your dog poops. If your dog has poops outside, obviously we'd like you to clean that up. We do have some bags outside and in here if you happen to get here from work or whatever and you haven't had a chance to grab any. You should also bring a regular 5 or 6 foot leash, whatever you walk your dog on typically. If you normally walk your dog on a flexi lead, then we would recommend that you not bring the flexi lead to class because it's a little harder to manage in the class environment. It also is very difficult to teach your dog how to do loose leash walking. You also need to bring whatever collar your dog normally wears. It might be a front clip harness, a head collar, nylon, whatever. Whatever you normally have your dog in, bring that to class. Then bring a hungry dog. If you normally feed your dog at dinner time at 5 in the evening, you're going to come to class at 7, I would just not feed your dog. I would bring some of his food to class and then feed him part of his meal during class along with some of the treats. Same thing in the morning. If you're going to come to a morning class on Saturday, don't feed your dog that morning. Now, if you have a really tiny breed, like a toy breed, I would still feed those dogs a little bit because they need to eat more often than some of the larger breeds do. We want your dog to come to class hungry, so don't feed your dog and then 20 minutes later pop into class because they might not be as motivated. Remember, this all goes to setting you and your dog up for as much success as possible. Here are some other things that can help you. If your dog is on a high quality diet, I'm not going to go into diet right now, but if you have questions of what you should be feeding your dog, definitely ask any of the instructors. We find that a really good high quality diet will make a huge difference in how well your dog learns and is able to respond to training. It sounds a little bit odd, but it's very much like kids. If you feed your child a whole bunch of candy and then try to sit down with them and try to get them to focus, they're going to be bouncing off the walls. The same is with dogs. We have some diets we recommend, so you can ask us about that. There are certain ways dogs act when they're on a quality diet that isn't as high energy as we might come up and say, hey, what kind of dog food are you feeding? We also may give you some suggestions. A little exercise before you bring your high energy dog to class might benefit also. If you can take your dog for a walk for about 20 minutes or play fetch before they come to class, just to take the edge off a little bit so they're not totally high energy when they get here. When you get here, we would ask that you do not approach or pet dogs in cars. Some dogs that are really friendly most of the time don't want you to necessarily approach their cars. For safety issues and to keep the dogs more relaxed, we would ask you not to approach or pet the dogs in the car, even if it's a dog you know. We just ask that's a general rule that you abide by. Also, it's great to get here a few minutes early and let them have a potty break. If you need to leave class because you think your dog has to go to the bathroom, that's fine. If your dog has an accident inside, it's no big deal. We'll help you clean that up also. We will review leash management tips when you get here. We are going to ask for now that you not let your dog say hi to every other dog, which means that you need to hold your leash about midway between the dog and the end of the leash. If you have the end of the leash and you have a 6-foot leash, that's great. Your dog can go 6 feet away from you. But if Jane comes into class and she also has the end of her leash with her dog 6 feet away from her, Jane and you now have to stay 12 feet apart in order for your dogs not to say hi. That's a really long distance. It's much further away than we would normally be if we were just going to say hi to each other. We want to make sure that your dog doesn't have the entire end of its leash by holding your dog about midway to the leash so they cannot be too far away from you as we get started. Once we get situated in class, we can give you a little more space so this won't be as much of a problem. It's a bigger problem when people start arriving in the class. We really want the dogs to focus on you, partly because we want to build that relationship between you and the dog, but also partly because if they're just facing away from you and looking and scanning the room, what will happen is dogs will start to make eye contact, and that will often lead to barking. They may bark because they want to play, or because they decide they're mad at each other, or whatever. The less direct eye contact we can get from the dogs, the better. The more we can get your dog to start looking at you, the better. When you first get to class, we're going to help you find a spot in the room, and then we're going to tell you initially just to throw treats randomly on the floor for your dog to find. All we're trying to do, again, is to set your dog up to say, hey, this is a cool place. There's food on the floor here, and start cleaning that up. Once we start the class, we're going to have other things to do, obviously. You're going to also remember that when you get to class to keep a distance between you and the other dogs so you can set everyone up for success. It can be very nerve-wracking when you first get to class, so hopefully all these things will help you. All right. Hopefully that helps you understand where we're going to be when you come in next week. I want you to spend the last few minutes just talking a little bit about the body language of your dog. This is going to help you actually read your dog and communicate with your dog much, much better. If you can learn some of this, you can be such a better advocate for your dog because you're going to know right away if your dog is happy or not. That's really critical to having a good relationship with your dog and to know when to step in and help your dog. With happy dogs, their body language is for the most part going to be relaxed, curvy, loose, and normal breathing. What I mean by normal breathing is for whatever exercises your dog is doing. Obviously, if your dog just went for a run, they're going to be panting. But if you drive someplace, let's say, for instance, you come here next week and you've just driven for home, your dog's been in the air-conditioned house, goes in an air-conditioned car, shows up in the facility, which is also air-conditioned, and now they're panting, it's because they're a little bit nervous. When I say normal breathing, it's dependent on the activity or exercise your dog is doing. But with happy dogs, you're really looking for those curvy, relaxed bodies, not a lot of stiffness. Nervous dogs are just the opposite. You're going to see the stiffened tension in their mouth, tension in their legs. You see that white dog who's got his legs kind of locked out in front? You're going to see that change in breathing pattern. That's the outside context of what the dog might be doing. And really, stiffness is the biggest key. You also want to look for what we call the stress signals, such as dilated pupils or eye contact avoidance. Looking at your dog's face, if you're trying to get your dog's attention and they're just kind of giving you the paw saying, talk to the paw, I don't have time to deal with you. Sometimes it could just be something is really interesting and they want to look at that instead. But other times it means they're really trying to avoid eye contact, and you're going to see that sometimes with dogs you don't know. The whites of the eyes on the outer edge of the eye might be showing, and this is something you don't normally see in a dog. However, if you start seeing that, it normally means that their head is still and they're looking away with their eyes. Because of that stiffened head, you're going to see that white. That can be just a little bit of nervousness. Lip licking is just another really easy signal to watch for. This is something we see all the time, but we just don't recognize it. Obviously, if your dog just ate some food, it might lick its lips. But if you're just sitting with your dog and you notice them start to pace and lick their lips, it usually means that your dog is getting a little bit worried about something. The last really couple of easy signals to see in your dogs include panting. Again, this is going to be panting outside of the context of exercise. The dog just starts to breathe heavily and pant. In that picture of the Dalmatian, you'll see that the ears are back and its tongue is started to tense in its mouth, as opposed to how your dog would look if it actually just ran somewhere. Its tongue would be flopping over the side. That panting is a little bit of stress. Shaking off is another real easy one to see. When your dog gets a little bit nervous or upset, or they've had an encounter that might be a little stressful, they just shake it off. Now, obviously, they could do this also if they were wet. When your dog gets out of the pool or a bath, they shake off. That's a totally different thing, but still the same behavior. It might also be that your dog has an ear infection. It will shake its head a lot, so that's also different. Shaking off is kind of a neurological reset. We do that ourselves. Let's say we got into an argument with somebody, or you just hung up the phone after you had a discussion with someone, and you go, "Oh, that was nerve-wracking," and you shake your head. It's the same kind of thing. The reason we bring up all these different signals and the understanding between happy and nervous dogs is that we want for you to watch for all of these in class. We want your dogs to be happy in class. The instructors are also going to be looking for this, but it's really, really helpful if you can start to see some of these things too. You're also going to be able to tell if you take your dog somewhere. You might be able to tell if your dog gets more nervous. If he does, then that's a good opportunity for you to step in and help the dog to relax, or move them to a new environment, or move them to a new area. It's just going to help you be a better advocate for your dog. Your homework this week, number one, is you're going to start to watch for what your dog's baseline is. I will tell you that at one point I had a lab mix, and I also had a shepherd mix. My lab generally showed very few signs of stress when he was at home. He was what we call a dog rug. My shepherd, on the other hand, lived in a sort of state of stress all the time. She was a little worrywart. So I would see some stress signals from her all the time, no matter what she was doing. Even at her most peaceful, she would show a little bit of stress. Every dog has a different baseline. I want you to see what is normal for your dog so that when you go somewhere new, you can, one, see if there is an increase in stress, two, is the stress decreasing, or three, is it about the same? That helps you to understand what makes your dog nervous and allows you to be more aware of when you might need to be your dog's advocate. We are going to talk about that when you come to class. If we see your dog is a little bit nervous, we're going to say, hey, let's move your dog over to this location. Or let's just do some play activities with your dog because your dog is seeming to be a little bit more nervous. Now you're going to understand more about why we are saying these things to you when you come into class. Hopefully, we're going to get your dogs all happy and comfortable and they won't be showing stress, which would be awesome. Next part of your homework is to start working on the name game. I will tell you that the name game is a requirement to move up to level 2, and typically it's the one thing that everyone needs to work on. The other requirements are sit at your side and a down. We can go ahead and lure into the down. Usually people can work on the sit, and a lot of people already know sit when they get here. So it's the name game we're usually practicing more often. First of all, what is the name game? We are looking for when you say your dog's name one time. Your dog turns its head and looks at you. They don't necessarily have to come to you. They don't necessarily have to do anything other than turn their heads and look at you. In order to teach this, the first thing you're going to do is say your dog's name in a happy voice. When your dog turns to look at you, you're going to say, good, Fido, whatever your dog's name is, and then you're going to give them a treat because you want to make this fun, make it happy. I would initially set this up when your dog is staring at you. Let's say you're fixing your dog's dinner. Just make it simple and easy. When you're fixing your dog's dinner, your dog's probably already looking at you. You're going to look at your dog and let's say your dog's name is Fido. You're going to go, Fido. Well, Fido's already doing the name game, so you're immediately going to say, good Fido, and give your dog a treat. Maybe do that one or two times. Then again, when it's relatively easy, maybe your dog is just in the room with you and you're reading a book and your dog is nearby, not really distracted, just in the same room. And you're going to say your dog's name, Fido. Hopefully your dog would just turn its head and look. You're going to say, good Fido, and you're going to give a treat. And you're going to practice that over and over as much as possible. So what happens if your dog does not look at you? If you're practicing this at home and you say Fido and Fido does not look, you're just going to take your treat, get up, and walk away. They only get one chance and they just missed it. And then you're going to come back and practice again later. Hopefully that won't happen. If your dog does not look at you while you're here at class, we're going to let you cheat a little bit. If you've been practicing the name game at home and your dog does really well at home, but then you come to class and the first time you do it, they're like, oh, didn't hear you, then we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. You can cheat a little bit by clapping your hands or scratching your dog in the rear end, or you could do a little bit of noise like pop, 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 any kind of kissy face noise like that. When they look at you, you're still going to say, good, Fido, and then you're still going to treat. You might just be getting their attention a little more. We're going to ask you not to try to repeat the name. That's the name game. Please start practicing the name game with your dog at home, and then we're going to see how well they're doing when you come to class for the first time as well. We hope that you've enjoyed this and are looking forward, like we are, to joining us for our levels class. See you at the next class.